So hello, it's good to be back, and I appreciate Meteor having me again, and to see some familiar faces. I'm here to talk about a new router project. Its code name is Iron Router. It's the best I could come up with. And it's been a real collaboration between me and Tom Coleman, who's the author of Meteor Router, and a couple of other people in the community, some of whom might be in the audience. And what I'm going to show you tonight is actually 3 packages. I'm going to focus on the router, but there's 3 packages that kind of make up this router experience. The first is obviously the router, the Iron Router project. The second underlying that is something called controllers. So it might be similar to, better?
Don't worry about it. I can manage volume from here.
Okay.
You can just let it sit.
Okay. So,
I can turn up.
which is a little bit similar to a demo you may have seen a few months ago from the controllers branch from Meteor. And underlying all of that is something called Posture, which is a package that I wrote to provide class and module support to Meteor. So, what does a router do? I think we turned down just a little. What does a router do? In a traditional web application, a router maps a URL to a function, typically on the server. And it might also combine that with an HTTP verb like a post or a get or a put. And the function on the server would traditionally return some HTML to the client, or it might do something else like render a JSON response or something like that. But with Meteor, we have an opportunity to do something a lot better. So I think for the first time ever, Meteor's given us the opportunity to create a router that works on the client and the server. And on the client, it has some really rich kind of integration with Spark and the user interface kind of functionality that Meteor provides. So let's get into it. And what we're going to do is build out an application. So has anyone been to the EventedMind site?
Yes.
Okay. So you're going to get a sneak preview today, exclusive, of the next version of EventedMind. And so what I've done is I've taken out some of the, I've just boiled it down to something that we can do in 20 minutes. I'm going to try really hard to stay in that time frame. And we're going to build out this application so that it supports routing. And so let me give you a quick preview here. What we have on the left is a sidebar. And you might consider this is where you put navigation, or we might put a footer down here. And on the right, we have a list of posts, just like what you'd see on the site. And there's some good CSS tricks here I'll show off. And what we want is when we click on these links, we want to be able to route to a post show page, just like you can do on the EventedMind site today. So I'm going to jump over to the code. And I'm going to move really fast through this part. And so if there's questions afterwards, we can talk and go through them, but hopefully this will make sense. So the code on the left is JavaScript that should look pretty familiar to you. So I have a collection. I'm sorry. Can you get bigger? I don't think I can, because otherwise I won't be able to see what I'm doing. Maybe it'll be easier if you come over here. So the people on the left
Yeah, the
are opposed. I'm sorry.
If it's any consolation, the resolution on the screencast video is usually pretty good.
I'm actually going to release the screencast tomorrow, so you can watch that. Just listen to the words and let them seep in. Okay, so over on the left, it's pretty straightforward so far. What we have is a post collection. It's on the client and it's on the server. And then in the server block, what we've got is a publication where I'm going to publish out all of my posts. In the client block, I'm going to subscribe to all the posts. And then I'm going to have a post helper on the template that just allows me to iterate over all of my posts. Down at the bottom, just ignore that for now. What it's doing is just telling the router to turn itself off. And then in the HTML, you can see that I put most of the stuff right into the body tag. And then it's not down until line 30 that we render out this child template called posts. And that's where I use the traditional Meteor handlebars helper each to iterate over this list and to print out the post items. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get started with routing by creating a root route. So to do that is pretty simple. I'm going to come over into the client block. I'm going to start off with just client routes, and at the end, if I haven't completely run out of time, we'll do server routes as well. So to create a route, I can just call router.map and pass a function. And then inside of there, I can create a new route by calling this.route and giving it a name. And then I'll come down here before I forget and get rid of this so the router actually works. So in its simplest form, what this is going to do is it's going to create a new route named post. And because the route is named the same as the post template, it'll just render that. But I want to create another route here called home. And this time I'm going to give it some options. The first option is going to be a path, and that's just going to be the route path. Except this time the template's going to be different. It's going to be the post template that I want to render. And the final thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to move this data from the template helper itself. But not that far. And move it in here. So this is just because it's just easier for me to have the data in close to the router where I know it's going to be used, as opposed to being strewn all over templates across my application. So if I were to, at any moment this demo could go wrong, like a million different things have to go right for this to work. So we're going to do our best and see. But if I go over to the client, oh thank goodness, what has happened is we've rendered the post template right into the body. So this illustrates an interesting thing that's happened. We've actually just overridden everything in the body with this post template. But what we want is we want the layout. We want to have all that nice sidebar over on the left, and we want to have our navigation and all that kind of stuff. So to achieve that, what I could do is I could take all this HTML in the body and I can move it into my template. And I could just use that over and over again in different templates. The problem is I have just a lot of duplication of code. Is problem one. Problem two is it doesn't let me do some neat things that I'll show you in a second. Someone is always in medical trouble in San Francisco. So what I want to do is to create a template called layout. And I'm going to move all of this code, mostly, actually all of it, into this layout template. And now instead of line 33, instead of rendering out post directly, I'm going to call something called yield with triple mustaches to indicate that I want to put HTML right onto the page. Now if I switch back to the browser now, you'll see that actually nothing has happened because I haven't told the router about the layout. So what I want to do is go over to the JavaScript, and inside this route I could specify a layout right here if I wanted to. But really I want this to be applicable to all of the routes. So what I'm going to do is come down into the router.configure and say for all of my routes, I want them to use the layout as the layout. And if I come over here now, I now have a layout in composition with this child template, which is pretty neat. So the next thing I want to do is to be able to click on one of these links and bring up the post show page. So let's go ahead and create another template down at the bottom called post show. And in post show, might have an article and a head at the top. Whoa. And I'm going to print out the subject, and then underneath that, the title. And then I might even have a description inside here. And then underneath the head, I'm going to have the body, and I'm just going to render out the HTML body of the post. So let's go and define one more route now called this.route.postShow. And this route is going to have a different kind of path. It's going to route to posts. Then I'm going to use a special token, which is the colon, to indicate that I have a variable here. And it's going to have a slug. And the template name I don't have to give because it's the same template name as the route name. But I do need to give some data here. So what I'm going to do is create a data function this time. And I'm going to do a post.findOne. And I want to find the post where the slug is equal to the slug that was passed into the URL. So if you've used Rails or Django or one of the other web frameworks, this should already be pretty familiar to you. But what I want to do is now take that variable from the URL and now put it in here. And I have access to that through the params. So I can say this .params.slug. And now I think without doing anything else, if I click this link, I now have the URL has changed. The fire department's not giving me a break. And I have the post show page. So the URL has changed, and now I have all the data for my post. But there's a little bit of a problem here. The problem is that if I refresh this page, you're not seeing it because it's happening so fast because the database is on my machine. But if you're on a mobile device or you go to the actual EventedMind site, I'm sure this has annoyed more than a few of you. The page initially shows up as blank, and it's not until the data comes off the wire that we actually see something on the page. And it presents another problem where if I go to a post that doesn't exist, like a bogus post, I just get an empty page. So there's no way at this point for me to know whether or not the data actually exists because it hasn't even come off the wire yet. So we need to fix that. So let's do that. So what I can do is I can tell this route to wait on something. And what do I want to wait on? I want to wait on the subscription. Subscriptions.posts. There we go. Is that spelled right? And so I actually stored a handle up here on line 10 to the post subscription. So when the Meteor subscribe method call returns, it returns a handle which has a ready method. And we can use that to say, hold off on the rendering until we actually have the data. But I can do one step better. I'm going to specify an option on the router called loading template. And I'm even going to specify another one called not found template. And I'll just go and define these quickly.
Good. Not found. Not good.
Up.
The first one.
Up. Got the wires crossed. Thank you. Okay, so if I haven't made any mistakes, what this should do now is wait for the subscription data to be ready. And in the meantime, what it's going to do is just show the loading indicator. This is going to happen pretty quickly, but hopefully you saw it if you've got good vision. But one that you'll definitely see is if we go to the bogus post, we show not found now. So this is sort of a nice way to use the data subscriptions that we get from Meteor, but use it in combination with a routed page. Okay, there's a couple other things I want to do. So one of them is when I go to this page, it seems like the title and the description up at the top are taking up an awful lot of space. I'd really like to move those over to the left. So I'd like that to show up on the layout itself. The other thing I want to do is, if I look at the JavaScript console and I click over to Elements, I've given the page a global class called Home. But I want that to change depending upon the page that I'm on. And the reason for that is I might want to style the page differently. So what we can do to achieve that is something called named yields. So what I'm going to do is up in my layout, instead of hard coding home in here, I'm going to yield the page class. And then down here, I'm going to yield the sidebar.
They need 3 curly braces on the top.
I don't, because it's not going to yield HTML. In this case, it's just going to yield a text value, so it should be safe. So then down in post show, what I'm going to do is I want to move all of this. Well, first what I'll do is I'll create the page class. And so I can use the content for method to do that. And I'm going to say this is for the page class, and I want to give it a value of post. And then I can use the block form of content for and move all of this stuff in there. Okay, and then the rest of it will just yield to the main page. And so if I come back out and go to, so you showed me that 5 minutes remaining, and then I got nervous and probably made a mistake. It's your fault.
Yeah, eat the name of the yield fund.
So keep that sign to yourself, Jay. Okay, so this time, I get some nice styling over on the right, and the title's been moved over onto the left. And so named yields are really useful for this purpose. So another thing I want to do here is I've got hard-coded links all throughout the application. So if I change one of the route paths, I have to go and change all the links. And so there's something for that called path helpers that get created. And they work both server-side and client-side. And so if I go here and I change this, I can use the path4 helper, and I want to make this the path for the home route. And similarly down here, I want to say this is the path for the post-show route. Okay, now I don't think I'm going to have time to do edit, but I'm going to plow through, I'm going to plow through it. I think I can do it in less than 3 minutes, and we'll see. Okay, so I want to do one more route called edit, but I'm going to combine some steps here to save time. So I'm going to create a form, and the form is going to have an input and a name, which I'll use later, and a value which we'll assign to the value of the title. And I think that should be good enough. And then what I'm going to do is create a save button. Okay, now over in the router, these routes are starting to get a little cumbersome, and in my application, as it grows, logic right into the router. As the application gets really big, I may actually want to have individual classes that control my routes. So what I'm going to start to do here is I'm going to create a controller. I'm going to call this post controller, and it's going to extend from route controller. And then I'm going to take all of this functionality and I'm going to move it down in here. And in here, I'm going to say that I want this to use the post controller. And I'm even going to give it an action and say I want this to be the show action. Then when we create the edit post, the only thing different here is going to be the path and the action. Now down in my controller, I can create these actions and call all the same methods that I was using before. So in this case, I'm going to render the post edit. And show, except in the show, I'm just going to render the show post-show template. Okay, so I do this pretty quickly, but it's showing you that basically all the logic that's in the router or in specific routes, if your application gets too big, you can move those into controllers. And controllers have a ton of great functionality. Like, for example, you can extend them. So I could create one application controller and move all of that routing logic that's in my, or all the global router config right into the application controller and just extend from it. But I can get some other methods in here too. Like, for example, there's extra callbacks on controllers, like on rendered, like we're used to. But how about also on first rendered? And also on reactive rendered. But one of the coolest things I can do with controllers is I can include other functionality. So what I'm going to do here is include the form functionality. So this could be a controller that someone else wrote. In this case, my alter ego wrote it. And the form controller is actually going to handle the events on this page and deal with it and allow me to submit the form. And this is the last thing that I'll do. And then I'll be done. And now the whole thing doesn't work. Okay. Because route router wouldn't be a very good name. Route controller would be a better name, I think. Woo. And I didn't have time to put the edit link there, but if I were to go here, please. And it didn't work. Okay, well, we've run out of time. And I've run out of get out of jail free cards with Jade. But what you would see there is that there's a form there, and when I click the button on the form, it submits it, and there's now a form controller that correctly parses out the form and just calls a method on my controller. And that method on my controller is onFormChanged. And onFormChanged gets values, it gets the post, and it gets some fields. Sorry, it gets the form itself so that I can reset it. And I might do my update here, and then maybe once the update is done, I can call the go method on the router itself, and I can just pass either a path or I can pass the name of the route. So in this case, once it's done, I might just go to the post show and pass the post as the parameters. And the router is smart enough to interpolate the values or the functions from the post right onto the URL and route you there correctly. So I think in conclusion, there's just way more here that I can possibly show in 20 minutes. But if you're a language buff or you've used some other languages, you might recognize some patterns that have been reused here. But this really gives us a lot of great functionality, including the ability to include functionality like from other classes like form or draggable, droppable. We can inherit controllers from other controllers. We can add methods. We can add helpers here. We can even define our own event maps on the controllers. So this isn't an open source project yet because I really want to get it working well and get the kinks worked out. But I'm going to release it after I release the next version of EventedMind. So if you're interested in participating in the project or you'd like to give it a spin, come up afterwards and talk to me, and we can do something. I don't know what we're going to do, but we'll do something. Do we have time for Q&A, or did I blow through the?
Yeah. We have time for like maybe 2 or 3 questions. How about that?
Okay. How do we know if they're going to be good? Oh, Sam.
What's the role of Posture?
Posture provides the class and module support system. Posture provides classes and modules. And so, and its key feature is that it works with CoffeeScript great as well. So one of the things I didn't get to show here was that you can create a class in CoffeeScript and call class level methods on the class, call instance level methods, just like you sort of can in Ruby if you're used to that. And it works great. So my inheritance mechanism is the same as the compiled version of CoffeeScript.
I think Casey wrote the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know if we can solve this with this, but I wanted to hear your thoughts. When Google goes to a Meteor app page, it gets nothing. It's included JavaScript, it doesn't see anything. And that's a big problem, especially if your app is relying on organic traffic.
Yeah.
You need to have some source code. And
that's why I have no users. That's why I have no users. I finally figured it out.
Exactly. Right? So how do we solve this? I mean, maybe I don't know if you. I mean, you're just a brilliant guy, so I figured maybe you could address this.
You should
with
make
some
the Meteor
beautiful stuff. But I mean, this is a big problem we got to confront.
Yeah, so there's something called the spiderable package. That's what I use. And it has some issues, but essentially what it does is it loads up the DOM on the server side, waits for all the subscriptions to finish, and then sends out the data. So EventedMind is fully Google searchable right now. But you do have to do some extra quirky things, like go onto Google Master Tools or whatever it's called, and like add the hash fragment or something afterwards. So when this is over, just come see me and I'll show you how to do it.
If we're already using the router package that's on an atmosphere, how...
You're talking about Meteor router, Tom's router? Yeah.
How different is it going to be to switch to this?
Not very different. This has before filters and after filters as well. It just has a lot more functionality. Oh, sorry. The question was, if you're already using Meteor Router, the popular router project, or even mini pages for that matter, which is my previous weekend router project. I mean, I did a good job with it, I think, but it's missing a lot of things. There's going to be some differences, but I don't think it's going to be that hard. So you still have before and after filters. The signature of defining the routes is different, and so there's a little bit. But I would recommend changing. I mean, there's actually just errors in the way that we both did reactivity and stuff like that, where there's I don't want to say it's a memory leak. In certain situations, there's a memory leak, and there's some other things that just got fixed completely with this. So.
All right. I think that's it for questions, but Chris will be...
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.